Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you. It was fantastic to be back. This is the second one of these talks that I've done. Quite different to the first one. If anybody had a chance to come to the first one, it was all about sandstone caves and tunnels in the northwest of England. And this is about lots of lovely concrete. We had a special request for a talk about concrete. So we pulled this one together, and the bunkers of Zossen, Wunsdorf, just north of Berlin. And a very long history that it does have there as well. So what we're going to do is we get started. As Tony said, it's if you feel free to use the chat to talk to each other, and if you have any questions, if you add them on the Q&A column just to the right hand side there, I will see them. I'll either answer them there and here and now. Remember, there's a short delay, and then what I can do is either answer them, or if it's going to come up later on, or if it's going to be something that I could more easily answer at the end, I'll do that. And if you think of anything on the way through that you'd like to ask at the end, a bit more complicated, I'll try and leave a few minutes then. But other than that, we're going to try and finish on time at 8 p.m. Okay, so welcome to the talk. We're going to talk about the bunkers of Zossen, Wunsdorf, Zossen, north of Berlin. Why me? Why am I talking? I am, as Tony mentioned, the Tunnelinspector. I worked for a very, very long time for Stockport Museum services. Apparently Zossen is pronounced Zossen with a T. Thank you, Hamish. And for a very long time, I looked after the air raid shelters in Stockport, and that got me involved with Subterranea Britannica, which meant that I became a Tunnelinspector and ended up going out and about to lots of interesting and different places. I hold city and guilds in high-risk confined spaces. I have done for the last 9 years. And I do risk assessments, safety assessments for underground spaces when they're found. I go and talk to people about opening up air raid shelters, and I go around and just basically wander around underground. I take an occasional blurry photograph. This one isn't one of mine. It's one of Ed Waters' fantastic photographs, but that is me in it. And I work with various groups as well as Subterranea Britannica. I've worked with Manchester Histories on the Manchester History Festival. I've worked with Manchester International Festival on a number of occasions. I've worked with the Imperial War Museum North as one of the specialist strategic specialist group. And last thing I did, just before we went into lockdown last year, I was working with Manchester International Festival and a group of quite mad Japanese artists on putting a brewery in a plague pit underneath Victoria Station in Manchester, and we brewed our own beer called A Drop of Pandemic, and sold that through the cholera pits underneath Victoria Station. So a lot of you will have already been members of Sub Brit or have heard of Sub Brit, but if you haven't, if you come to us out of the blue and you wondered what this was all about, Subterranea Britannica has been going for 45 years, I think, this year. So a very long time, and is the British organisation for exploration, recording and study of any man-made or man-used or woman-made or woman-used underground space. So it will cover all those things that you can see in front of you on that very terrible photograph that I need to get another one of. We cover air raid shelters, bell pits, bunkers, canal tunnels, catacombs, caves, chalk pits, Cold War, control centres, conduits, crypts, dean holes, dungeons, follies, fortifications, grottos, ice houses, military works, mines, ossuaries, underground quarries, refuges, reservoirs, rock posts, lots of rock posts, sally ports and sewers, silos and subways, surface remains, tunnels, underground railways, wells, and much, much more. If you can think of something underground, one of us has already had a head in it. We probably took a photo and wandered around underground and then come out and told everybody it's far too dangerous, you can't go back in. We do cover a fair amount of stuff that's actually not underground. As you can see, it says surface remains of the Cold War especially, but also surface remains of things that are connected to our underground spaces. There's absolutely no point looking at an underground reservoir without the pumping station above it. There's absolutely no point looking at an ROC post if you're not going to look at the platform next to it where they used to stand and the oilet next door. So let's have a look. Next thing we're talking about. Why Zossen? Why were we, as Sub Brit, or myself as Tunnelinspector and Bev as Sub Brit, why were we in Zossen, which is north of Berlin, in Germany? This was a trip we did in April 2019. and it was a Subterranea Britannica trip abroad to Berlin for a long weekend. And we visited all sorts of absolutely amazing places. We visited the underground remains of Tempelhof Airport, which was a very nice 5 or 6 hours, I think we were underground. We visited... oh, sorry, Tony. Yes, we're south of Berlin. Really? Okay, so Zossen with a T is south of Berlin. Okay. And we visited various places. We visited various air raid shelters and tunnels underneath Berlin Centre. We visited Elliot Ricks at the Berliner Unterwelten group, took us around a couple of fantastic places. And we went out and about to Hanekop and various other bunkers around and about Berlin. On the Monday, the last day of the trip, we had the opportunity to spend the whole day in a place called Wunsdorf Zossen, which is south of Berlin, and it was it's been a site. It's been used for over 100 years as a central location, an interesting location. So the next thing to look at is the timeline of occupation for this site. So back in 1910, there was in the forests south of Berlin, near the Wunsdorf community, the Imperial German Army, as it was then, put in a garrison, put in a training school and a cavalry school, and it was a rather large military camp. It was the site of several prisoner of war camps during the First World War, including, very interestingly, the Halbonlager, the Crescent Camp for Muslims who had fought for the West, for the Triple Entente, and it's where the first wooden mosque in Germany was erected. So the First World War, unlike the Second World War, the German forces were very tolerant of other religions and looked after the prisoners of war that they took very, very well. As well as they could. And in this camp were a number of very interesting prisoners. The one that caught my eye especially was a gentleman called Douglas Grant. Douglas Grant was of Aboriginal extraction from Australia and fought very hard in various battles before being caught and became prisoner of war at Zossen-Wunsdorf. And he was a celebrity during that time, so he had free reign. He could leave the camp whenever he wanted. I think they actually said to him he would get found very quickly if he tried to run away. So he was actually sculpted by a very famous Jewish sculptor in Berlin, and he went to lots of soirees and meetings and things like that as a representative of the POWs at the camp before going back to Australia at the end of the war. So it's very interesting. So that's Douglas Grant, the gentleman there. So from after the First World War, the site became the Army Sports School. So it was a central location for all the sportsmen, mostly, of the first the Imperial German Army and then the Reich Army after 1933. And this is where they trained for the Olympics in Berlin, and it was a major location. It was also a tank training ground. This is a big site. This is a lot of space in this forest. And what happened was, in the early 1930s, it became the headquarters of first the Army General Staff and then later on the Armed Forces General Staff. And these General Staffs needed to have excellent communications. So the High Command realized that Berlin as a capital city was going to be bombed in the next war, and that they needed the telex systems, the telephone systems, to be safe from bombing. There are various ways you can do this. You can bury them very, very deeply, or what you can do is put them in a big ring around the outside of the city. And that is what the Germans did. They put all their main telephone lines, their telex lines, communications, in a large ring going right around the outside of Berlin. And they had two locations, one north and one south. And we now know the south one is Zossen, which were where bunkers were constructed, and they were actually constructed by the German post office. So the Reichspost created these because they ran the telephone and the telex services, and this meant that they were protected sites, and they were used for sorry, my phone was going. They were used for communications, but also they were used for signal intelligence. So these were very much military sites. They were they could pass communications across the whole of Europe, from European Russia right through to France, very, very quickly and very easily and very securely. Very hard to tap a cable if it's very deep underground, despite what they tried to do in Berlin later on in the Cold War. So this is a very important, very, very secretive site. So, as it says, from 1935 to 39 to 45, Wunsdorf hosted the underground headquarters of the German Wehrmacht, the OKW, and that's the Army High Command, the Armed Forces High Command, and then the Heeren, which is the Army High Command. They're in two separate sites on the same location. So there were a set of bunkers called MAYBACH 1, which was the Army headquarters, and then MAYBACH 2, which was the Armed Forces headquarters, and just to one side and deep underground was the Zeppelin bunker. The Zeppelin bunker is the original bunker, the first one. It's the big underground one. It's the communications bunker. What we're going to do today, we're going to look first at Zeppelin, then we're going to look at MAYBACH 1 and what happened to MAYBACH 2, and then we're going to, as it says, look at what happened after World War II. So after World War II, this site was taken over by the Soviet military, and it became a forbidden city, a special location. The East Germans were not allowed to access it, housing as many as 75,000 Soviet men, women, and children. They weren't allowed to mingle with the East Germans outside the base, which was absolutely huge, had every facility that they wanted there, and there was a train station with daily trains going to Moscow direct, non-stop. And what happened then, the commanders of the Soviet forces in Germany, or East Germany, decided that they needed to have a secure communications base. So what they did, they went back into Zeppelin in 1960, and they took part of Zeppelin over and nuclear bomb-proofed it, or CBRN'd it, to become the command center for the group of Soviet forces in Germany, High Command. So this is where they would go if there was a nuclear threat or a nuclear bomb war had started. This is where the command of the high command of the Soviet force in Germany would go, and they would be protected in there in a part of the old Nazi bunker, which had been refurbished, and they would stay in there and direct the troops going across West Germany. Soviet troops and Soviet families all pulled out in August 1994, and yes, I know the wall fell in 1989 and Germany was reunited not long afterwards. Soviet troops were still there for quite a few years after. So the last troops pulled out in August 94, and then it was returned to the German civilian authorities, and it became well, first off, it was left to rot, and then it became the Wunsdorf Volstadt, which is a book town, and we'll have a quick look at that when we get to that bit. So let's get on and have a look at some bunkers. So the first one we're looking at is the Zeppelin bunker. So this is the communications bunker that's down into one side of MAYBACH 1 and MAYBACH 2. So three different locations on the same site. There are other smaller bunkers there that you can visit as well. But these are the three we're going to look at today because they're the main ones. So the Zeppelin bunker was erected, as I said, by the Reichspost, so the post office of Nazi Germany, on the orders of the high command of the army at the end of the 1930s. It's built between 37 and 39, and it was built as a signal intelligence center, but it was actually classed as a post office. So it was a postal office of 500. It's a two-lane straight building with 117 meters long, which in old money is 330 feet, by 22 meters wide, which is 66 feet. No, 96 feet. Yes. And then they built an annex on the side, which again, all this is underground. A third entrance was added in 1938, and it could be accessed by trucks. This place was so big you could drive your car or a small truck into the actual bunker. there was a tunnel, a long northern tunnel, which was your main access point, and then they built a second tunnel, a south tunnel, which connected the bunker with MAYBACH 1 and MAYBACH 2, which were off down to the southwest. Interestingly, the bunker entrances had the traditional fake houses above them, long before they were done for rotor bunkers and the Cold War in the UK. And they were done, of course, for aerial photography. So what you would have is two small houses instead of a great big bunker. Right, let's have a look at some photos of some actual lovely concrete. So this is the entrance into Zeppelin, and what you can see here is a sort of cut up, bastardized entrance. So the road leading down in front of Linda there, there's lots of Sub Britters on this photo. You can try and spot people. And the road leading down Linda there would have been covered over, and this is part of the long north entrance tunnel into the bunker as it was in the 1930s, 1940s. When it was reused in the 1960s, the Russians opened all this area up because they destroyed it, opened it all up, put new entrance on, put a little bit of a defensive pillbox on top there to the left, and then a little pointy guardhouse, which is just there to the right, with a nice doorway on it. They weren't really expecting ground troops to come here. This was really for the protection of the guards who would be watching out for nuclear bombs and things like that. All right. As you can see, the sign on the right tells you can't go around anywhere. You can't wander off. Don't wander off from the path. And again, they when the Russians left, they left a huge amount of unused ammunition and munitions. They left shops full of white goods, and they left pets behind. They were given 24 hours notice to head back to Moscow in 1994, and it's still being cleaned up. We spent some time in wandering around those woods, and there's lots of rusty bits of metal and things you shouldn't really be messing with lying around. So next photo is we have two doors, and this is a really nice example of the reuse that the bunker was put to. So the door on the left hand side is a lovely chemical, biological and nuclear door, airlock door. It's Soviet, it's 1960, it's in immaculate condition, could do with a bit of a wash, a bit of a touch up on the paint, and it is now the main entrance to Zeppelin. The one on the right is slightly older. If you get a chance and you can zoom in on that image, you'll be able to see it says Deutsche Reiche Post on it, or Deutsche Reiche Post, and it is one of the original doorways from the 1930s, and it was found deep in the tunnels. As I said, they only reused part of this bunker in 1960. So the further you go in, the deeper you go, the more is World War II and German, as opposed to 1960s and Soviet and or Russian. But it's really nice to have the two doors side by side. They both fulfill the same purpose. They both stop nasty stuff getting into the bunker. But you can see from the 1937 door, that they were not expecting the same stuff. So it's a fraction of the thickness. It's a gas-proof door, so it does have a gas-proof like a rubber bit around the edges, so it would stop any gas coming into the bunker, but it wouldn't stop, obviously, fallout or anything like that. And the filtration system, part of which is just to the side there, would not have been able to cope with a nuclear attack, obviously, because they weren't thought of at that point. So there we go. Lots more Sub-Britters. Again, see if you can spot yourselves. And what we have is the obligatory nice plan of the bunker. What we have here is the bunkers, as we know, is two long corridors with that shape off to one side is the annex, and it's on 4 floors. So it's absolutely massive. And it's in incredibly good condition, most of it, especially the bits that were restored by the Russians in the 60s. Absolutely fantastic condition, and that's one of the doors and the lamps, the bulkhead lights that you can see there on the left, in door number 21. They're all lovingly marked and numbered up. And again, this is an internal gas-proof door. So they wouldn't have been as strong as the one to get into the bunker, but it was a way of sealing off different sections and different floors in the case of a breach during a nuclear attack. And the stairwell you can see there on the right, you can see all the original paint, and a lot of that paint is some of it's luminous paint from 1937, which the Germans specialised in. A lot of it is Russian whitewash. And again, there's a lovely bulkhead light there, just to the right. And you can see just how far down the bunker does go on that stairwell. We weren't given a huge amount of time in here because we had to head on to the next place. We had adequate amount of time. It was great, and but we could have spent the whole day just going around this bunker, and to fit in another 2 bunkers and all the Forbidden City stuff as well was really difficult to try and fit everything in to just this one day. You could go for a week and wander around there. So next one. So this is 2 photographs of the lower reaches of the bunker. So the one on the left is Soviet equipment. You can see that because it's got Soviet writing on the front. But if you strip off the Soviet paint and the Soviet writing, you'll see it's actually Riker Post blue. So this is some of the equipment that was actually left behind in the bunker in 1945 when it was abandoned to the Russians as the Russians came in. General Krebs tried to abandon or evacuate the bunker, was not given permission, and in the end he left with only 24 hours before the first Soviet troops or Russian troops entered. They only found 4 people left behind and all the equipment in perfect working order. So they did what the Russians often did, and they put it all on trucks and cattle cars and headed it off to Berlin, to Moscow, disappeared off to Moscow, and then a few years later they actually brought it back. So this is some of the equipment that left in 1945, came back in 1960. And that's very, very deep. And you can see from the state of the ceiling above that there's been various issues with damp ingress and mold and fires and things like that. And the photo on the right shows that again. And what you've got is one of the communications tunnels. It's a long, very long straight tunnel. And what the Russians did in 1960 was they used this as a way to run cables. So that racking up onto the left-hand side of the photo and partly on the wall on the right is actually for the cables for the communication center of the Soviet High Command in East Germany. And that's what they did with most of these unused tunnels from the German era. They ran cables through them, they used the equipment, but they didn't really use the tunnels as a day-to-day resource. So they didn't keep them maintained. They only really used them to put the cables through, hence them looking quite dilapidated. And if you compare that one to the next one, we have a photo of a couple of the areas the Russians did use on a daily basis. So you can see they're in much better condition. The floors have been covered in vinyl, the paint's been kept up to date, everything's been maintained, the sprinkler system's been maintained, and the air conditioning unit's been upgraded. And this looks much different to the one before it. As you can see here, we flick back. So the photo there on the right, if you compare that to the photo on the right on this slide, where it's much better maintained. So this long tunnel is this is the south tunnel. It reaches out towards MAYBACH 2 and MAYBACH 1, and it was closed off at the far end when MAYBACH 1 was demolished in 1946. So this really is a tunnel to nowhere. They didn't reopen this one, the Russians. They reopened the north one, which is the one we entered the bunker through at the beginning of the photographs. So this long south tunnel was used for storage. It was used for more cable racking, as you can see on the left-hand side there. But interestingly, on the right, you can see there are these drop-down beds. So those flat items on the right-hand side with chains on them, those are drop-down beds for people who are working inside the bunker. So if you were on a long shift and you weren't able to come out, that's where you would get some sleep. And of course, in the case of an escalation to war, what would happen is the staff would go into the bunker would become sealed, they would need somewhere to sleep. And that's what this tunnel was used for. It was used as a dormitory tunnel, and it was used for, I hope they gave them some pillows and a blanket. It's quite damp and chilly down there. And it was used to, as I say, run cables and do communications stuff. So, considering it was deep underground, these next photos show some quite significant damage. So right in the center of the bunker, in the old main communications room, you go in and there's this massive void space, and it's obviously been exploded. It's a demolition attempt, but was it caused by an air raid, or was it caused an internal explosion? I think most of us can tell it's an internal explosion. Mainly because it hasn't breached the outside, so it's not coming from outside. Zossen was bombed on a number of occasions, despite being top secret. The Russians knew where it was, and I think the Americans as well. It was bombed on a number of occasions. One particularly large bombing raid in March 1945, which I referred to 2 or 3 times in the course of this talk, which affected MAYBACH 1 and actually injured Krebs, and it affected the town of Zossen, which of course had grown up around the military base. But this, as I said, is not an external bomb damage. This is deep within the bunker. It's right in the middle of the bunker. And what happened was 1944, I think 1945, the Potsdam Agreement. So the 4 powers that were on the Western side during the war, so France, England, or the United Kingdom, and Russia, they got together and split up, and America, and they split up, and when they talked about the partitioning Germany and Austria after the war, one of the things that was decided at Potsdam was that any surviving military ordnance or buildings or useful equipment that belonged to Germany should be destroyed. So we're looking at military bases, we're looking at tanks and airplanes and V2 rockets and everything to do with that should all be destroyed, and that Germany would become demilitarized. Now, the Western powers tended to demilitarize by stealing everything in sight and taking it away, and then learning how to do it better, as did Russia. But for some reason, in 1946, the Russian troops who'd taken over Zossen Wunsdorf, they held on to this agreement. They actually demolished MAYBACH 1 and 2, and they attempted to demolish Zeppelin. By all accounts, what they did was they pulled together the thousands of tons of munitions that were lying around the area in southern Berlin and around the military training camp itself. They put them all in the middle of the bunker and they blew it up. And it's a testament to the strength of the concrete and the thickness of the concrete that you can see there. That two photos on the right-hand side show the thickness of the ceiling directly above the explosion. So all those hundreds of tons of explosive materials, they did make a big mess, but they didn't even structurally affect the walls either side of the room they were in. They made a big hole in the roof, in the ceiling, but as you can see from the middle photograph, some simple concrete shoring, concrete beams solved that problem only 15 years later, when the bunker was needed again in 1960. The Soviets did a better job with MAYBACH 1 and MAYBACH 2, but we'll see that when we go and look at the photographs there. So, as I said, come 1960, the Russians discover that they actually could do with a secure site, that they could run communications and have a central bunker for their high command near Berlin. And they decided, actually, we blew up this bunker and didn't do a very good job of it. They had destroyed the entrance, so they blew up that section going into the North Tunnel, where I said they dug it out in 1960 and where we entered. That had all been blown up. They'd attempted to blow up the Zeppelin bunker, pretty much failed, and just left it as it was. So come 1960, they're looking for a bunker. They've already using the town of Wunsdorf, the area around it, as a headquarters, and they said, actually, we'll reopen it. We'll reopen it and go inside and see what can be reused. So they do. 1960, they go in. Again, this is all absolutely top secret. It's not to be known by any of the Western powers what's going on. And what they did was they dug themselves back into the tunnel complex, and they found a section that was in relatively good condition, and they restored it. Now, they restored it to full 1960s high spec levels. So it is chemical, nuclear, biological, chemical proof. What's the other one? There's a fourth one I can't remember. And it is safe against all of those, and it is in immaculate condition. A surprising amount of it is immaculate condition. As I said, in '94 when they left, they literally just walked out, got on the train, and went. And the team that look after it are doing a fantastic job of maintaining that in the condition that it is in. And here we've got some pictures of some of the rooms that were left in '94, and you can see that the Soviets had reused some of the old ventilation systems. That first photograph on the left is part of the old Nazi ventilation system that linked into the new Soviet one in 1960, but they also added all sorts of extra bits and pieces. They did a spring-loaded section for the nuclear blast, and they put all sorts of extra bits and pieces in. So the troops that were in there from the 1960s, they were in from 1963 till 1989, 1990. They tended to go off on shift and then wandered off into the dark tunnels, and like all troops, they went and put their name on it. So anyone who's been anywhere in Eastern Europe, anyone who's been anywhere in Berlin, especially in Eastern Berlin, will have seen Cyrillic writing all over every flat wall that they could possibly find. And it was no different here. So this is Russian graffiti. As you can see, there's 73 in the middle. Some of it goes back to the 60s, some of it is much more modern. And deep within tunnels, there is various equipment leading from the Soviets, but also the deeper you go, as I said, the more stuff that's left behind from World War II and the original German use of the tunnels. So when the Soviets rebuild it and go back in to and build Ranets, the communication center of the Soviet forces in the GDR, what they do is they turn Zossen Wunsdorf into a forbidden city. And when we look at towards the end of this talk, we're going to have a look at the Forbidden City and how it works and what some of those buildings were used for. So, as I say, Zeppelin is only a part of the huge network that's available at Zossen Wunsdorf, but it's best preserved. There are smaller Russian transport bunkers, but the next thing that we're going to have a look at is MAYBACH 1 and 2. So contemporaries with Zeppelin. What MAYBACH 1 and 2 was a protected majority above ground headquarters. One was, as I said, was for the Army HQ, one was for the Armed Forces HQ. That's 1 and 2. And it was built roughly the same time as Zeppelin and right next door. So as I say, Zeppelin's south tunnel led off to MAYBACH 1, and you could communicate between the two without going above the ground. And again, this was all absolutely top secret. The complex, interestingly, it was 12 three-story buildings all above ground, and they were designed from the air to resemble local housing. So the houses in this area have very, very steep pitched roofs, and these bunkers were built in a very particular way to resemble from the air local housing, and then 2 floors of bunkers underneath that linked between the 12 buildings. The 12 buildings were in a circle, and the circular bunker levels are still down there. They were very deep. There were wells for drinking water and plumbing, air filter systems, and diesel engines to keep systems operational. And later on, the areas between the houses were actually, they strung netting between the houses, so it looked like there were gardens and trees between the buildings. Maybach 2 was completed in 1940. It was exactly the same design, but 11 buildings instead of 12, and that was just down the road. It wasn't actually connected, and in fact was kept quite separate from Maybach 1. So there was actually fencing and guards and armed guards between the two. Which, as part of the July 20th plotters, were in Maybach 1, and the people who were plotting really didn't want the July 20th plotters were in Maybach 2. So that's one of the reasons why. So the Army High Command was quite traditional, and the Wehrmacht High Command, the General Armed Forces High Command, was much more Nazi. I mean, they were all pretty bad. There wasn't really a clean slate among a lot of them. So, yeah. But the next picture we have. So this is a traditional Zossen Wunsdorf house. It's currently an antiquarian bookstore, as are many of the houses there. As I said, and Wunsdorf is now a book town, and I'll go into that a bit later, but it's a really good way of explaining how these houses are supposed to look. As you can see, it's on 3 floors with an extremely steep pitched roof, and they're quite big. That car next to the right-hand side there, you can see it's a bit in the distance, but you see these are big houses, and you can understand that you from the air, when you're looking at just roofs, especially if they're in an oval shape, you're not going to consider that to be a military target in the forest south of Berlin, unless you know what's going on in there. So let's look at some lovely concrete. As I said, 1946, Potsdam Agreement, the Russians had agreed with the Western powers that anything that could be of military use was to be destroyed, was to be blown up, and Germany was to be demilitarized. And that included Zossen Wunsdorf. So Maybach 1, which is what these bunkers are part of, was blown up and destroyed in 1946. At the same time, they attempted to destroy Zeppelin. As we know, we've seen the big hole, and we know that it didn't really succeed. So what they did was with Wunsdorf 1 and 2, they did a much better job. Now, to give you some idea of the scale of these buildings, those are Sub Britters just to the right hand side, walking along the path, the special path that you have to keep to. You're definitely not allowed to stray from the path or go wandering among all these big ruins in case you bang your head or get a cut on your finger or injure yourself. And as all good Sub Britters, we followed the guide's instructions to the letter. Definitely didn't go for any wandering around at all. But what you can see is just how damaged these buildings are. So the picture on the right, that's a gas-proof door that you can see there on its side. And you can see the thickness of the concrete. It's good 2.5 feet thick. There's an air vent above it to bring to release contaminated air from inside the bunker. And you can see just how thick the side walls of these houses were. Now that's an important distinction. So the side walls and where the roof comes down were extremely thick, and as they went down into the ground, 2 stories, and those were also 2 feet thick of concrete. But the front walls were not. So that's a bit more of a close-up of that. You can see again just how thick the concrete is on either side of these buildings. But the front and back walls were not in any way sustainable for a bomb raid. They were made of these concrete beams, as you can see in these photographs, and in between were bricks. And it was quite a thin shell of brick. The idea being, if there was a bomb either onto the property itself, it would slide down the roof and explode to the side. But if there was a bomb in front or below of one of these buildings, a high explosive bomb, what it would do is it would blow out that wall. It would either blow it out one way or it would blow it into the building. Each building had a shadow section below, so anyone who's working the building during an air raid would go down a level into the lower reaches and hopefully be safe for the duration of the raid, and then come back up after the end and continue working. But as you can see, there were lots of spare people not so much spare equipment. And as time went on during the war, what tended to happen, especially after the complex was discovered by the Allies, is people tended to just do their work lower down in the tunnels. But what that meant was when the Russians did destroy these bunkers, they really did a good job of them, and they blew out all these brick walls. It's quite rare to see one still in place, but we have a tiny amount left here. This is actually right at the very top of, I think it's building 4. And you can see it's a very thin layer of brick with plaster on the end. And that was designed to blow out in the case of a bomb landing, like I say, in the building through the vent shaft above or to either side of the building. And if you compare that, I mean, this entire one, this is building 4. The entire base has been blown out, and actually the top has landed directly on the hole where the rest of the bunker was. So it's quite a nice one to see, because you can actually see quite close up what would normally be very high above your head. Just the right-hand side, behind the lovely Mrs. Tunnelinspector, Mrs. C is there, doing a photograph, is an example of the huge chunks of concrete. This is a corner section, and this had actually been blown quite a few feet. I think it was 30 feet from the building it had been blown out of. So it traveled quite some way. The explosions must have been huge to actually destroy these buildings in such a way. So, as I said, we definitely didn't go inside any of these buildings. It's far too dangerous. So while the guide wasn't looking, we nipped in. We didn't get down into the lower reaches. You can go and do a trip round the lower tunnels, but it's a full day with like a cave diving suit or a wetsuit on and wellies. They're quite badly flooded. But what we were able to see by a little bit of judicial wandering was to see the close up some of the more internal sections. So as you can see here, these are the gas-proof doors, and these would have led down into the lower reaches of the tunnels. And you can see just how badly buckled they are. They're 2-meter doors, so they're 6'6", and they've been heavily damaged by the explosions that blew these buildings up. And that's like that one on the left-hand side there. You can see the rebar sticking out of the concrete and how thick the concrete is. And that's actually, again, a section of the corners of one of the buildings that's been blown some way into the forest. And there we go. And as you can see, it's quite dangerous in there. You could bang your head quite easily, get something off one of these bits of nasty rebar, but also these sections that are quite close to the surface have been heavily picked apart by souvenir hunters and Soviet troops. Bored Soviet troops would go and party in there and write their name on the wall. And you can see like quite a lot of graffiti. You do find the odd bits left, mainly the bits that were too heavy to nick. So the gas-proof doors you can see there, and the circuit box for some of the wiring is still in place, and the wiring was all in tubes and pipes. And that's all still in place. So we have where up to? Excellent. So the next one, as I said, so the top reaches of this bunker network have been heavily picked apart, but that doesn't apply to the lower reaches. And this is a selection of some of the stuff that had been found quite recently by the guides, and their at time off, their lunch break, they go wandering around the lower reaches of the bunker network. And what we're looking at here is 70 years of junk going right back to Nazi Germany. Some of the boots there are World War II German boots. There are also 60s and 70s Russian equipment and boots, and quite a lot of empty bottles, beer bottles especially, wandering around down there, bits of chain, bits of metal and things like that. Mess cans and things that have just been dumped down there in the tunnels, and they are just lying around down there, and the guides go in and have a good look for them. So I'll go back to slide number 17. That's the one. So as I said, these were all blown up in 1946 as part of the Potsdam Agreement, and MAYBACH 2 was actually completely cleared. So another complex, this was 12 bunkers. Maybach 2 was 11 bunkers, the same size, the same thickness, same exact design, were blown up by the Russians in 1946, and they were blown up so completely that there's no trace of them remaining. There isn't even the lumps of concrete in the woods. It's all absolutely gone. And that was the other network. This one does still remain in place, mainly because it was a useful sort of hide for when they went back into Zeppelin. So they could use it as a visit, a day out for the Russian troops and the people walking around there. If there was ever any suspicion that they were using it for military purposes, there'd be an explanation, a reason for their troops to be wandering around. They were on a day out, they're going to look at the old German bunkers. As I say, they tended to wander around, have parties in the base and everything. Now, as I said, when the Russians came in to take Zossen Wunsdorf in April 1945, they discovered the entire Zeppelin was actually in perfect condition. There are some accounts that the technicians who had only abandoned the place 24 hours before actually left notes on the equipment saying, please do not blow this up, this is important, please take care of this equipment. Whether that's true, I don't know. There's no photos of it, but it's a nice story. And like I say, what the Russians did, as they did with nearly everything that wasn't nailed down in Berlin, they immediately put it on a train, sent it back to Russia, worked out how to use it, and carried on looking and using that equipment before coming back in 15 years later and reusing it and using the place itself as a base. So, was Zossen bombed during the war? Yes, it was. It was a top secret site up until 1944, when the Russians realized something was going on there, or at least admitted that they knew something was going on there. As the Russian troops got closer in 1945, they put out a couple of calls for a bombing raid that would be helpful to them. And in March 1945, Zossen was heavily bombed by the US Air Force. And there was, by all accounts, I've got a note somewhere, I think it was 25,000 incendiaries were dropped, and a lot of high explosive was dropped. Didn't do any significant damage to the buildings. Didn't touch the Zeppelin at all. Made a bit of a mess of bits of Wunsdorf. Caught Krebs out in the open, and he was quite injured. But as far as the actual ongoing use of the site, it just carried on immediately afterwards. There was no significant damage done. But of course, it was then targeted. The Russians knew where it was, and the Germans knew that the Russians knew where it was, and they looked into trying to evacuate. When they moved the high command of the army and the high command of the armed forces out, as I said, they went within 24 hours notice, left everything exactly as it was, and when the Russians walked through the gates, which were unlocked in April 1945, they found 4 people on site wandering around, and shipped them off and headed them out. So the bunkers of Zossen, as I said, there's Zeppelin, the communications bunker, there's Maybach 1 and Maybach 2 and their underground networks. There's also other sections of Zossen which would class as a bunker. There's a communications bunker for the Soviets, that a transport bunker that you can visit, and various other little bits and pieces. But what is really nice is the largest network surviving of these air raid shelters. So these are actually above ground structures, but they count as a bunker. And they were developed in the 1930s by Leo Winkel, and they're known as the Winkel type of air raid shelter. They're also known as a Hock bunker or a Spitz bunker, which means either a tall bunker or a peaked bunker. And these are absolutely massive. The largest one of these could hold 600 people on 3 floors. You entered quite high up on one of those little doorways, and there was a gantry leading up to them. And there were 19 of these bunkers built in Zossen Wunsdorf during the war, and like I said, they were bombed, and the town was bombed, and they held up extremely well. The idea being that a bomb slides down the side of the bunker, before exploding, and it explodes at the base. Obviously, only a fraction of the directed explosion then actually hits the bunker itself, the air raid shelter itself, and it hits it at its strongest and thickest point. Hence the sloping sides, so that the thickest section is right at the bottom, and that's where any bombs would blow up. So the largest holds up to 600 people. There are others around Germany. They're in Hamburg and various other places. Quite a lot were made. Lots and lots have been demolished, including 11 of the 19 bunkers in Zossen, which were actually blown up by the Russians after the war, at the same time as they were demilitarizing and they realized that actually it was a complete waste of their time. I mean, these are air raid shelters. They've no military use at all. And they left 11. One is open to visit. Unfortunately, it wasn't open on the day we went. But if you go to visit Zossen, you can go into one of these and have a look around and have a look at the different floors and levels, and some nice pictures online. If you do a nice Google search of Winkel bunker, you can find lots of pictures of inside of there. So like I say, 11 of them were demolished, but by the Russians after the war. None of them were even remotely damaged by the huge US Air Force bombing raid on Zossen. So you can see just how big they are. They're quite significant. They're really massive. Built of brick with a concrete skin, but they relied on the thickness of the walls to maintain its integrity. So even if there was a hole blown in the side of one of these, it wouldn't cause too much damage, and with the partition of the floors, 3 floors in each, it would cause less casualties. By all accounts, only 2 of these were ever breached by bombs during World War II, and I think there was 6 casualties in all. In all of the bunkers, these hog bunkers across the whole of Germany, there were only 6 casualties. So it was a fantastic design, a beautiful design, and it's great that the ones that are left behind now are actually protected structures. So you're not allowed to blow them up anymore. The good thing about Zossen is you get to see open ones, you get to see closed ones upright, and then you also get to see the ones that have been blown up. They're just literally around the corner. You walk around the streets, turn the corner, and you'll see either one of these or the remains of one, all blown up, and you can go and see them just walking around. Now, what do you see if you go to Zossen Wunsdorf today? So, the ruins of the above-ground bunker entrance houses remain. Those are the pointy ones that we were looking at for MAYBACH 1 and MAYBACH 2. There's lots of guided tours available of the area, and there's a museum in the Wunsdorf Book Town, which houses exhibits on the military history and the bunker complex itself. MAYBACH 2 is gone. MAYBACH 1, there's bits you can see as long as you don't stray from the path, and you can go and do the full day tour deep under it with lots of wellies on and things like that. But what you have are surrounding these bunkers is the Forbidden City itself. So like I say, come 1946, the Russians take over Wunsdorf as an entirety. They look at this space, they look at the buildings there, and remember, this was the Army Sports School. It was extremely well set up. It has swimming pools, it has a riding school with the big sand thing that you ride horses on. It has shooting ranges and lots of space, lots and lots of buildings that they could use. They saw this was a great idea, and they moved in almost immediately. And what they did from 1946 right through to 1994 was they used this as one of their main HQs. So Zossen Wunsdorf became the largest Russian military location or military base outside of Russia itself. It's the largest Soviet military base outside of Russia itself. I said 45,000 people. Sorry, 75,000 people lived there. It had everything on site. Not only did it have the facilities that were already there from the Germans, so they added extra things. They added a theatre and various other things and shops and everything you could possibly want as part of being, it was like Little Russia. All the street signs were in Russian, in Cyrillic. There was no East Germans wandering around, not even to come and clean or anything like that. And what you had was this slightly unprepossessing building. Now, I choose the photographs. They're out the window of a coach. But this is actually a really important building. So you can just see on the right-hand photograph, that little blue streak is a mainline train into Berlin Hauptbahnhof, the central station. Takes about 15 minutes, and the people of Wunsdorf now, Zossen now, are banking on that being their future. So there's only about 3,000 people live in Berlin, in Wunsdorf, Zossen at the moment. There's huge swathes of Russian housing just collapsing, and various buildings that are falling to pieces. And what the town planners and the mayor want to do is reopen this building. So this is Zossen Station. Now, Zossen Station did not go to Berlin for all those years, from 1946 through to 1994. It didn't go to Berlin, which was only 50 minutes of the road. It had one location, one destination only. 2 trains a day left this station, and they went to Moscow. Direct, no stops to Moscow twice daily from this station. And you could fly as well from the local airport straight through to Moscow. Communications not only by telex and telephone, and later on by military communications and radio, but your communications, your actual practical communications of moving people and supplies was unbelievably good. So that's quite a chunk of Europe you're heading across on that train. And it shot off, like I said, twice a day off to Moscow. You could go off and go backwards and forwards quite easily, and that's what this building was. This was the hub of that train network, the single, two-directional train network. Hopefully, if they get it reopened, what the town planners and the mayor of Wunsdorf want to happen is that people who can no longer afford to live in Berlin Central move out to this area. And they can move out to this area and commute into Berlin to work. Housing in Berlin is becoming increasingly expensive, hugely expensive in areas of the old East Berlin. It's getting very difficult to afford to rent there. And what they want is a large group of people to move out of Berlin Central and come out to the outskirts and to commute by train into Berlin Central. Okay, let's get a swig of tea. So what are the facilities then can they offer? Well, they can offer Lenin. He's still there. So there's the quite a significant lump of Lenin is still stood outside this lovely yellow building. It's actually a complex of buildings called the Officers' House. And what is what remains of the original 1920s sports school. So as you can see, there's the building itself, which is absolutely massive. It's 8 floors and cellars and attics, hundreds of rooms. The middle photograph is the swimming pool, Olympic-sized swimming pool. And then there is the riding school and a photograph of the theatre, which is it's absolutely massive. It's all just there. You can walk around it. Some of it's bit dangerous, falling to bits, but there were schools and shops and facilities and cinemas and theatres, and this was a lively location for a lot of people, very high-ranking people, and all these facilities are still there. Now they also had by all accounts, a rather lovely museum. So the museum there was mostly about the Battle of Berlin, when Russian troops headed in to Berlin Central. And its specialty was mainly because it was full of the actual equipment. So equipment taken from the streets of Berlin in 1945 was put straight into this museum. And there was an entire building built as a panorama, a circular painting. And that painting was a panorama of the Battle of Berlin, which you stood in the middle of, and you looked around at the Battle of Berlin with models in front showing the various street fighting and where the bunker was and things like that. And it was used as a teaching tool for the officers who were at the Officers' House, and they learned all about the Battle of Berlin and how it was fought and street fighting, and they learned all about that in this museum. And the museum in 1994 was offered to the German authorities, They didn't want it, and by all accounts, it was boxed up and sent off back to Russia, where nobody saw it since. It's probably still in packing cases somewhere, in one of the museum networks somewhere in Russia. And what you've got is a situation where it could have so easily been kept and maintained. But like all these buildings, as you can see, that photo there on the left is the building on the right is a restored 1930s barracks from the German use of the site, which is being rebuilt as flats. The building on the left of that image is a 1960s, 1970s Russian or Soviet barracks, which is falling down. And you can see in front of it, there would have been 3 or 4 more like that have been demolished. And what's happening is the authorities are looking at the strongest buildings. So the 1930s buildings, they're looking at those, they're restoring those, and they're opening them up as flats to hopefully entice in people to come and live there and to use that space. There's all sorts of lovely bits and pieces lying around when you walk around the buildings. Lots of you can see there's some nice electricity warnings in Russian, and the piece in the middle is the front of a boiler from the swimming pool. So it shows that all the equipment there was not East German equipment, it was all made in Russia. Lots of it got the red star on. Lots of it's got Moscow written on it. All the generators and everything were all made in Russia and shipped out there. They didn't give the East Germans any opportunity to see what was going on or to do any spying. And by all accounts, the only time you saw an East German in this area was when they entered the officer's house to be interrogated. Now, when we went in to visit the officer's house, we had a whole grand total of 7 minutes in this building, that huge 8-floored building. And we were told, don't even attempt to go down to the cellars. The cellars are all sealed off. You can't go down there. And by all accounts, that's where the cells were for people who had fallen foul of the authorities and fallen foul of the Soviets, and they went into there. So what we did was split up and headed off in different directions. I headed up towards the attic, and I found this intriguing suite of rooms. So what you've got here is 2 rooms side by side. All images are from the left-hand room, and through that black hole in the second photograph, you can see there's a second room on the other side. There would have been a piece of glass there, one-way glass. And what you have here is a recording suite. And there's some primitive recording equipment, reel-to-reel tapes and various channels. And it's pretty trashed, but it's all still in place. And a nice big, I've translated that. It actually says documentation board or notice board on the top of that notice board. I was hoping for more, frankly, when I had it translated, but didn't get that. So what you have here is what's been tentatively identified as a radio station, where the troops, the Soviets, could broadcast radio speeches and music out across Zossen, Wunsdorf, and to maintain the spirits of the troops and the people who live there. And at first glance, you would agree that does bear a distinct resemblance to a radio booth, and the room on the other side is heavily soundproofed, but it doesn't have a broadcast in the other room. All it has in the other room is a microphone and a chair. This was a interrogation suite, and it was a very late interrogation suite. This is 1980s technology. This is not 1960s Soviet heavy-handedness. And what you have here is an interrogation suite where people would be interrogated in the room on the other side of that window, and it would all be recorded onto tape and onto data disk in this room. And by all accounts, the cellars are much, much worse. So if you get a chance to go and visit Berlin, which you should do anyway, because it's absolutely fantastic, you should also go and visit Berlin at Unterwelten and the groups that we went around with. Tony Radson, who did the introduction to this, was organised this trip, and it was an absolutely fantastic trip, I've got to say. They had an amazing amount of work, and the locations that he chose were absolutely brilliant. It was a fantastic visit. We were blessed with really good weather as well. If you want to know more about visiting Wunsdorf or Zossen Wunsdorf, as I say, it's now a book town. This started in the 1990s in Hay-on-Wye, and what it was is a global initiative to boost smaller towns that were failing by them having lots of bookshops and book festivals. And Wunsdorf thought, well, we'll get on with that, and that's what they became. They became a Bücher Stadt, so a book town. And you can see this is the main website, the front page of the main website for Wunsdorf. And as you can see, the top left-hand corner, it has the rather lovely, it's a book and bunker town. The book and bunker town of Wunsdorf. And they hold lots of different art events and food events and bookshop and book events throughout the year. But you can also visit the bunkers. There's a wide variety of tours above and below ground at the bunkers. As I said, we were there for the whole day, and we only scratched the surface. We could have spent a week there, and while we were there, rather terribly, there was only one bookshop open, and we didn't get a chance to go around all the other bookshops. And just to look through the window, there were lots of Sub Britters with their faces pressed against the glass, eyes cupped with their hands, searching for that elusive German language version of how to build a bunker. It's an amazing place. It really is. And the people that looked after us while we were there were absolutely brilliant. The tours that they took us on, they were very understanding of Sub Brit's tendency to wander. They were very patient with us, and they gave us lots and lots of time and space. We had a nice mix of photographers and historians on the trip, so the guide was quite willing to go and talk to the historians and wander about while the photographers messed around with tripods and lights and things. And everybody got something out of the trip. So we are coming up to 22. So I'll just have a quick thank you. What I was going to do is I'm going to try and finish at 1:45 to answer any questions. So if you do have any questions, if you've not put them in the question and answers already, put them in now, and then I'll be able to see them and answer them as I go through. Can't see any more apart from Zossen being pronounced Zossen. But what we can do is say thank you for coming. If you are a member of Subterranea Britannica, thank you for coming. But if you are not, also thank you. Sub Brit is an amazing organisation, and it needs your help. We need you to join Sub Brit. What you do is you get access not only to a fantastic magazine 3 times a year, and to the best writing on underground spaces, not just in Britain, but across the world, by absolute experts, but also you get access to our website and our forum where you can talk to other specialists and get advice. And what you can do is access our database. So the database of Sub Brit is an amazing resource of images and photographs and information about bunkers and underground spaces all over the UK. And it includes the whole of the ROC records from the 90s and earlier. And we want you to come and help us, because we need to update it. We need to get in there and find out what's happening with these places and fill up more underground locations. We're also on Twitter and we're on Facebook. And one of the things that we've done as part of the pandemic, what happened was our visits had to stop. There was no way we could do socially distanced visits, and that's hit Sub Brit really hard this year. We had to cancel our conference in London in the spring, where we had some absolutely fantastic talks lined up. I helped organise the talks, so they are very, very good. And what we've done is we've moved that to spring 2021. But also this year, every other year, we run a weekend in the UK and we did different locations. We've been to Belfast, we've been to Edinburgh, we've been to Newcastle and Manchester, and we've been to Liverpool. And this year we were heading for Daventry and Sywell Aerodrome, and we had some amazing visits. Catesby Tunnel was on the visits list, the Mid England Barrow, which is the latest or the most recent place where you can actually put your cremains in a modern built barrow, and it was going to be an absolutely fantastic weekend. That was due to happen in a month or so, and that again has been completely cancelled. So that has been moved to October 2021. While we're not doing those visits, what we have done, and what Richard and Tony have put a huge amount of work into, is these in the dark online webinars. As Tony said, this is the 9th, and everyone has been of an extremely high standard. I've done 2 myself. I know they're great, but the other ones that I've listened to on Gibraltar and on Cookfield RSC Post and on Ed Waters has done 2, one on lava tubes, which was absolutely unbelievably good, and one on witch marks and things like that. They're all available for free, and you can access those for free on our YouTube page or through Big Marker here, the link that you've got for this one, and you can look back and watch them at any time in the future. So if you've missed this one, what you can do is go and watch it again. It should be available, I think, from tomorrow. You can go back and listen to my dulcet tones again of anything that you've missed out, or if you think of any questions while you listen back to it, or it comes to 3 o'clock tomorrow morning and you wake up screaming at the ceiling, oh my God, I wish I'd asked this. Send it through, it's fine. We'll answer it anyway. You can answer it either through subbrit.org.uk, or you can contact me directly on tunnelinspector.com, or on Facebook, Tunnelinspector13, or on Tunnelinspector on Twitter. And one of the things that we've only recently done is the Subterranea Britannica magazine, Sub Brit magazine, which is absolutely brilliant, has a deep resource of back issues. And what we've done, everything up to 2 years ago, so the last 2 years are for members only, but anything before that, going back many years, they have all been added to the Internet Archive. I'm not sure of the link, but I'm sure Tony can put the link on the chat because he knows what it is. And what we could do, or if you're on the Sub Brit forum, you can find those, and there's actually an index. So if you're interested in a particular type of underground space, whether it be an air raid shelter or a cave dwelling or an ice house, you can use the index to discover the articles by some of the most experienced people in the world writing on these different spaces, and you can find those up to 2 years ago. If you want anything less than 2 years old, you have to join Sub Brit and order the magazines, and you get the magazines, and you can find those. Now, I've got a question from Kevin. Kevin says, would Bricksmiths be allowed near this site? So Bricksmiths is and Socksmiths was the other side. So Bricksmiths was the British military organization that would go across into East Berlin and into East Germany, and they would tootle about, making sure the Soviets weren't doing anything they weren't supposed to. And the Soviet ones, Socksmiths, would come the other direction. They go into West Berlin and they go into West Germany and see that the Brits and the French and the Americans weren't doing anything they weren't supposed to. So they were allegedly not an intelligence gathering organization, but they blatantly were, and the Russians knew they were. Bricksmiths would not be allowed anywhere near this location. This was, again, top secret, especially the bunker. The Zeppelin reuse was top secret. And Harnakop and the other bunkers for the East German High Command, again, were top secret. I'm pretty sure the Allies, the West, knew where they were. But like I say, this location, the whole of this location was off limits to any East German. So they were only Russian troops, and all the cleaners and the support staff were all Russian as well. There were no East German cleaners coming in. Apparently, there was occasional opportunities for high-ranking diplomats and that to go out into the local area and show their face, but really there was no mixing at all, and bricksmiths would definitely not be allowed anywhere near this location. Okay, and fantastic. Tony's put the link up. It's Sub Brit, www.subbrit.org.uk/magazine/ and that will take you directly to the resource, the old magazines of Subterranea, and you'll see what you're getting. I mean, it's insanely cheap to join Sub Brit. It's £27 a year. And for that, you get the access to the forum, you get access to the magazine, you get access to the last 2 years of magazines, and you get access to these trips, and the trips are absolutely brilliant. And when we can go out on trips, not just across Europe, we do lots and lots of trips within the UK. We do mail rail, where we walk the tunnels. We've done, and I've done the Liverpool one, the Queensway Tunnel, and the Friends of Williamson's Tunnels. The Williamson's Tunnels in Liverpool is an absolutely amazing location, which Sub Brit has been to 2 or 3 times, and it's absolutely brilliant. But also what we're able to do, if you have an underground space and you would like to improve access to it, what Sub Brit can do is we have a grant program. So we have funded staircases in a couple of locations. I think Wartling and Williamson Tunnels, we funded staircases, we funded information boards. We are helping Grassington Mines. Grassington is a moor in the northeast that's full of holes, and cows and sheep keep falling down them, and stray hikers. And the Grassington Mines Appreciation Society are doing a fantastic job of putting caps on some and fences around the others. And we're helping them with that. We're helping them with some money for that. And then what we're doing is they're very kindly putting Sub Brit on the information board. And if you have an underground space, if you have access to a space that is underground and needs a bit of cash, especially in this awkward situation, the pandemic situation, just get in touch with us. We'll happily supply, even if we don't supply money, we can supply expertise. Lots of us have equipment and skills and high-risk confined spaces certification. You know, you knock through a wall in your kitchen, you find a hole on the other side, get in touch with us. We'll come and have a look at it. There's no hole too small for a sub-Britter to disappear through. And some of the photos on our website show that there's just a pair of feet sticking out of them, and the smallest holes in the world. So I haven't had any other questions come through, and there's still 10 minutes to go. So what I'll do is bang it back to a bit more near the beginning and give people a second chance to look through the slides. So there we go. So like I said, this is a recap of the slides just very quickly. So we've got 10 minutes. So we started off, this is the north tunnel into Zeppelin. Like I said, this is the one that was blown up by the Russians, and then they reopened it in 1960. And so this would have been undercover originally, and it's been reopened when they put a second bunker in the middle of Zeppelin in 1960. We've got the 2 doors there, the Riker Post door on the right from 1937 and the 1960 Russian door on the left. And there's a rather large bust of Lenin's head that is usually used to prop that door open, which is quite amusing to see. Yeah, we're going down through. I think you can spot a couple of sub-Britters there. You recognise some names, the top of people's heads. You can just see how big this network is. This bunker was absolutely massive. Like I said, the day before, we'd actually visited 2 other bunkers, the East German bunkers at Harnekop, and there was another one began with a G. And they were, again, really massive, unbelievably good bunkers. And I mean, Berlin and East Germany is riddled with holes anyway. And interesting places to visit. But if you do get a chance to go and go and visit some of these amazing places. There we go. We've got equipment with Riker Post blue underneath Russian, sort of a beigey sandstone, really. And there's the long tunnel. So this is the south tunnel, the one that led over to MAYBACH 1. And it was sealed off at the other side. They blew up MAYBACH 1. And was used for, as you can see, for storage, for cable running, and for sleeping in. It must have been very damp and horrible. This is the big hole in the middle of Zeppelin that was caused by the Russians attempting to blow it up and failing. And they've just done a bit of patchwork on it. And again, it's a big old hole, but it shows you how thick the ceilings, or the floors and ceilings, the internal spaces were, and how well rebarred. There's a lot of rebar in that concrete. What we've got here is part of the old German ventilator system reused by the Soviets, and then Soviet machine shop on the right. And you can see the difference between the used and unused sections of the bunkers from the 1960s onwards, right up to 1994. Russian graffiti, as I said, Russians will write on anything they can and do, and you can see it all over Berlin, along with the bullet holes. Maybach 1. So these are the bunkers for Maybach 1. As I said, Maybach 2 has been completely destroyed, nowhere to be seen. What you have here is the remains of these huge houses, false houses, where the side walls were incredibly thick and very, very strong, and the roof was quite thick and strong, and then the end walls either side were very thin, almost a screen of brick rather than any concrete at all in the main sections, and then concrete pillars holding them up. And they were literally designed to blow out when there was a bomb nearby, and it was there as a sacrificial wall while the troops and the people working there were all deep in the network of tunnels beneath. There we go. It's a nice gas-proof door, and there's that network of concrete pillars and cross pieces holding up the side walls of these bunkers. Mrs. Tunnelinspector taking a photo, and she's in the kitchen now. She's glaring at me, and a lovely big lump of concrete. Again, this is the one that was blown off the corner. It was actually blown about 30 feet into the woods, and it landed in one piece. So there must be, a lot of weight there. And these explosions when they blew up these bunkers were really big. These are the gas-proof doors that we definitely didn't wander into, the underneath bit where we weren't allowed to go to take photos of. And there's some photos of the underneath bits that we definitely didn't go to because we weren't allowed to go to. And there we go. And like I said, these are the bits and pieces that were found in the tunnels since 1946, or since the Russians started wandering around down there. And these are ones that have been found much more recently in the real lower depths. The second is 2 stories of tunnels, or 2 floors of tunnels underneath the network. Below this ring of houses, this ring of fake houses in Zeppelin 1, in Maybach 1. There we go. What's happening here? A quick check of the public one and see if there's anything that people are asking. Oh, it's all gone a bit weird. There we go. Lots of people saying thank you for the talk. That's very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. And there we go. So I think that's it.